She waited in silence, but he never came. It was a cloudless spring morning in the sleepy town of Elmridge, and yet, for Claire, it felt like winter had taken residence in her chest. The air around the old chapel buzzed with whispers and shifting glances as she stood alone at the altar, her white dress glowing under the soft stained glass light. There was no music, no footsteps, no groom. She had met Thomas Monroe 4 years ago, before the headlines, before the millions, before the world knew his name. Back then, he was just a kind, awkward man, sketching building designs in the back of a cafe. She had fallen for the way he listened, not just to her words, but to the spaces between them. They had promised each other forever in that very church. But today, as time slipped past the hour of the ceremony, Claire began to feel the cruel weight of silence. Her father clenched his jaw in the front pew. Her friends avoided her gaze. And still, no sign of him. By noon, it was clear. He wasn't coming. A bridesmaid gently touched Claire's arm, whispering, "Maybe he got caught in traffic." But Claire knew. Thomas wasn't the kind of man who'd arrive late. He was the kind who disappeared with a reason. And maybe, just maybe, she wasn't part of that reason anymore. She walked out of the church alone, her veil trailing like a ghost behind her, the church bells chiming not to celebrate, but to mourn a love that never reached the altar. He vanished, like a ghost, but his name wouldn't leave her lips. Claire didn't cry on the car ride home, not in front of her father, not in front of the town. She simply sat in the back seat, veil crumpled in her lap, staring out at the winding road that passed the same cafe where they had once fallen in love. Her silence was louder than any scream. The tabloids would have a feast. Small-town girl stood up by billionaire groom. Her pain would be turned into headlines, but that wasn't what hurt. What broke her was the not knowing. There had been no message, no explanation, no plane delay, no emergency call. Just an empty aisle and a vanished man. She replayed his last words in her head. "I'll see you at the altar, no matter what." He had looked her in the eye when he said it. Was it all a performance? That night, Claire sat in her childhood room, still in her dress, still refusing to remove the ring he had slipped on her finger weeks before. Her phone buzzed with messages, sympathy, pity, curiosity. She ignored them all. Then, just past midnight, she opened a drawer and pulled out an old, folded paper napkin. On it, a sketch of a church, their church, the one he had drawn for her the day they first kissed. In the corner, he had scribbled a tiny note. "One day, I'll build a life with you here." Her fingers traced the lines, her heart torn between memory and rage. Had he lied even then? And yet, deep down, beneath the hurt, something flickered. A question she couldn't silence. What if something had happened to him? The world thought she was the one left behind. But he was the one who disappeared without a goodbye. 2 days passed, then 5, then a full week. The media had already moved on, but Elmridge hadn't. People whispered behind coffee cups. Neighbors paused their gardening to stare when Claire stepped outside. Some offered condolences, others cruel curiosity. But no one knew the truth, not even Claire. She didn't speak to anyone, not even her best friend Emily, who showed up with wine and silence, trying to break through the wall Claire had built around herself. But grief is strange. It doesn't knock. It settles. And then, on the 8th day, a letter arrived. No return address, no stamp. Just her name, handwritten, in that familiar architectural handwriting that used to make her smile. Claire hesitated before opening it. Her hands trembled, her breath caught. Inside was a single sheet and a plane ticket. To Paris, tomorrow night. One last chance. No explanation, no signature, just that. She stared at it for what felt like hours. Thomas had always talked about Paris, said it was the only place where he could disappear into the crowd, where no one cared about last names or fortunes. They were supposed to honeymoon there. Was this a cruel joke, a final twist of the knife? Or was it real? That night, she didn't sleep. She sat on the edge of her bed, staring at the ticket, wondering if love ever really vanished, or if sometimes it just ran out of time. When the morning came, Claire packed a single bag. No dress, no makeup, no expectations. Just hope. Fragile, dangerous hope. Paris had always been a dream, but this time it held more questions than romance. Claire stepped off the plane into the cold Paris night, her breath fogging the air as she clutched the coat around her shoulders. The city shimmered, as if mocking her confusion with its beauty. The Eiffel Tower blinked in the distance like a forgotten promise, and taxi lights scattered across the cobblestone streets. She had no hotel reservation, no itinerary, just the name of a cafe scribbled on the back of the ticket. Le Jardin de Verre. A place they had once spoken about visiting years ago, when their dreams were still shared. The cab dropped her off in a narrow alley, just as the bells of a nearby cathedral chimed 7. The cafe was real, tucked between a bookstore and a florist, its windows fogged by the warmth inside. Claire hesitated, her heart thudding like a drum in her chest. Then she stepped in. The scent of espresso and old wood greeted her, a quiet hum of voices, none of which she recognized. The waiter approached, and before she could speak, he handed her a note. He asked me to give you this. Her fingers trembled again as she opened the envelope. Inside, in that same familiar hand, was another message. Sit at our table. Look at the painting. Wait. Her eyes scanned the room until she found the corner table, by the window, beneath a framed painting of a church that looked suspiciously like the one back home. She sat, staring at the brushstrokes, heart pounding with every tick of the clock. 5 minutes passed, then 10, and just as she began to doubt everything, a shadow appeared in the glass reflection of the window, tall, familiar. And then she heard his voice, low, shaken. Claire. Time stopped. Her breath caught, and the past walked back into the room. Claire turned slowly, afraid that if she moved too fast, the moment would vanish like smoke. There he was, Thomas Monroe, the man who had left her waiting at the altar, the man who had vanished without a word, now standing before her with tired eyes and a soul that looked heavier than before. He hadn't changed much, still impeccably dressed, though not in the polished billionaire way she'd seen in magazines. He looked human now, rumpled, raw, like he hadn't slept in days. I wasn't sure you'd come, he said quietly. Claire didn't answer at first. Her voice was buried beneath 1,000 unsaid words. She studied his face, searching for the man she once knew, and maybe still loved. Why am I here? She finally whispered, her voice tight. Thomas sat across from her, his hands trembling slightly as he set down a worn leather notebook. Because I need you to know the truth. She didn't flinch, didn't lean forward, just waited. I didn't leave you, not really. I was forced to disappear, to protect you. Claire blinked. It sounded absurd, cinematic, but his eyes weren't lying. There was something I couldn't tell you, he continued. Something that would have put you in danger. And I thought, if I stayed away, you'd be safe. She clenched her jaw. You let me believe you didn't want me anymore. I thought it was the only way. The words hung in the air, fragile and unfinished. Paris buzzed quietly outside, unaware of the earthquake unraveling in that small cafe. Claire's hands curled into fists on the table, not out of rage, but from the gravity of something else. Hope. Again. But this time, she needed more than words. Truth is a strange thing. It can mend a heart, or shatter it beyond repair. Claire stared at him, her breath shallow, as the noise of the cafe faded into silence. Outside, a light drizzle began to fall on the windows, as if the sky itself had decided to listen. Thomas opened the worn notebook in front of him. Inside were pages, handwritten, some torn, some smudged, sketches, notes, journal entries. Her name appeared again and again, as if she had lived in his mind long after she believed he had forgotten. "I was being followed," he said. "Not by paparazzi, not by reporters, by men who didn't care about love or weddings. They cared about leverage. And you were my only weakness." Claire's eyes narrowed. "You're saying you disappeared to protect me from what? A threat?" He nodded slowly. "It started when I closed a deal with an international investor. I found out too late he was laundering money through one of the subsidiaries. When I tried to pull out, they made it clear. If I didn't cooperate, they'd come for the people I loved." His voice cracked. "You were the first name, they said." Claire's chest tightened. This wasn't the story she had imagined. Not a betrayal. Not cold feet. A man running not from love, but for it. "I've spent every day since watching from afar," he said. "Keeping them away, trying to dissolve everything, piece by piece. But when the threats stopped, when I thought it was safe, I was too late." She touched the edge of the notebook with trembling fingers. "You should have told me. I couldn't risk it." The space between them was small, yet filled with 4 years of pain, silence, and longing. Claire looked down. "I don't know if I can forgive you," she whispered. Thomas didn't flinch. "I didn't come here for forgiveness," he said. "I came here to ask for a second beginning. Sometimes love doesn't need a fresh start. It needs the truth to breathe again." Claire sat in silence, the notebook still open in front of her. She scanned the pages slowly, sketches of her profile, the church where they were to be married, even the little cabin by the lake where they had once dreamed of growing old together. His absence had been brutal, but these pages, they whispered that he had never really left. "Do you remember," she said suddenly, "when we danced in the rain after your first design was accepted?" Thomas's eyes flickered with life. "You wore my hoodie, and we ruined your shoes. I didn't care about the shoes. I did. They cost me a week's rent." Claire almost smiled. Almost. But the ache was still there. "I don't know how to feel," she admitted. "You say it was all to protect me, but I was the one who had to live with being left. I was the one who faced the silence, the pity, the headlines. Alone." Thomas nodded, pain written across his face. "And I will carry that forever. But I'm not asking you to forget. I'm just asking you not to walk away without seeing what's still here." He reached into his coat and placed a small velvet box on the table. He didn't open it. Just let it sit there, a symbol, a question. No photographers, no press, no flowers or guests. Just us, on a rooftop in Paris, tonight, if you say yes. Claire looked at it for a long time. "What if I say no? Then I'll walk away, but I'll never stop loving you." The rain tapped louder on the window now, as if echoing the heartbeat in her chest. Claire stood up slowly. "I'll be at the rooftop," she said, "but I won't make promises I can't keep." Thomas stood too, a flicker of hope lighting his tired eyes. "That's more than I deserve." Paris was always a city of love. But that night, it became a city of reckoning. Claire walked the narrow streets of Montmartre, her heels tapping softly against the slick stone as rain misted the cobblestones. She wore no gown, no veil. Just a long navy coat, her hair loosely pinned back, and a storm in her chest that hadn't calmed since she stepped into the cafe. The rooftop was 3 stories above a small bookshop, one they had browsed together on a trip years ago. He had said then, "If I ever propose, it should be right here, because you love stories more than diamonds." And now, here she was, walking up creaky wooden stairs toward a moment she never thought would come. When she stepped onto the rooftop, the wind caught her breath. The Eiffel Tower shimmered in the distance, golden and silent. String lights swayed overhead and candles flickered in glass jars on a small table set for 2. But it wasn't grand. It was quiet, personal. Him. Thomas stood at the edge, back turned, staring out over the city like a man who had waited a lifetime for one answer. She took a step forward. He turned. No words. Just that look, the one she remembered from mornings in their old apartment, before everything changed. "You came," he whispered. "I said I would." He nodded. No expectations, just dinner, just time. Claire moved to the table. She didn't sit. Instead, she reached for the box he had left unopened earlier. She opened it slowly. Inside wasn't a ring. It was the key to the cabin. Their cabin. He spoke, softly. "The land's still ours. I never sold it." She looked up, her voice steadier now. "Then maybe we start there." And for the first time in years, Thomas smiled, not the smile of a billionaire, but of a man who had found his way home. Sometimes the smallest keys unlock the heaviest doors. The fire crackled softly in the hearth of the old lakeside cabin. It had been 2 weeks since Paris, 2 weeks of hesitant conversation, of long walks, and cautious laughter. Claire had agreed to visit the cabin, not as a promise, but as a beginning. A fragile seed of something lost, but not forgotten. She ran her fingers across the windowsill, still scratched with their initials. T+C, carved with a penknife on a summer evening when forever still felt like a sure thing. Everything smelled of cedar and memory. The porch swing still creaked in the wind. The bed still faced the water. Thomas moved slowly through the space, careful not to disturb the ghosts that still lived there. He had spent the last year renovating it in secret, perhaps as penance, perhaps as hope. Every board, every lamp, every brushed wall spoke of care. It wasn't a billionaire's retreat. It was a love letter built from wood and silence. That night, they ate dinner on the floor by the fireplace. No music, just the crackle of flames and the hum of the night outside. Claire finally asked, "Why didn't you tell me you kept this place?" Thomas stared into the fire. "Because I was afraid it would hurt more, knowing it was waiting, if you weren't." She exhaled. "You should have trusted me." "I know that now." There was no kiss, no sudden embrace, just the soft press of her hand over his. "I don't forgive you," she whispered. He nodded. "I don't expect you to. But I'm tired of hating you." Outside, snow began to fall for the first time that season, dusting the roof like a fresh start. And inside, the warmth returned, not to the room, but to their hearts, one flicker at a time. Some wounds don't close with time. They heal through presence. In the days that followed, the cabin became a kind of quiet sanctuary. The world faded. No tabloids, no shareholders, no shadows from the past. Just two people rediscovering each other, not as they were, but as they had become. Changed, weathered, still standing. Claire spent her mornings writing in a leather journal Thomas had left for her by the fireplace. Not letters to him, not poetry, just fragments, memories, questions, bits of hurt still finding their voice. She didn't show them to him, not yet, but he noticed her shoulders lightening. Thomas, for his part, didn't push. He cooked. He fixed the squeaky porch hinge. He replaced the loose shingles she had once pointed out, years ago, and never let him forget. He did all the things he should have done when they were younger, back when love felt invincible. One evening, as the lake reflected the golden light of sunset, Claire sat beside him on the porch swing. Neither spoke for a long time. Then she asked, "What happens when the world finds us again?" He looked at her, serious. "Then we face it, together, or not at all." "And if they try to pull you back in? The meetings, the headlines, the politics?" He took her hand. "Then they'll learn I've already chosen what matters." She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she rested her head against his shoulder, just slightly. The gesture was small, but to him, it was everything. In that moment, Thomas understood. Forgiveness wasn't a grand moment or a dramatic speech. It was a slow, silent re-entry into someone's trust. A quiet evening by a lake. A head resting lightly against you when it could have turned away. And Claire realized something too. Love wasn't always safe, but sometimes it was worth the risk again. Love doesn't return with fireworks. It returns with quiet choices made every day. Claire woke before dawn. The cabin was still, bathed in the soft blue of early morning. She moved through the silence, watching the lake beyond the frost-covered windows, a mug of coffee warming her hands. She hadn't said, "I love you." Not since before the wedding day that never happened. And Thomas hadn't asked. He seemed to understand now that rebuilding didn't start with declarations. It started with presence, with showing up again and again, even after everything fell apart. Later that morning, they went into town for supplies. Elmridge hadn't changed much. A few new stores, some aging signs, but the same sleepy spirit. People stared. Some recognized them. A few murmured their names. One woman whispered, "He's back." And Claire felt a strange mix of pride and fear ripple through her. At the market, Thomas reached for a jar on the top shelf and handed it to her. A small act, but his hand lingered just slightly against hers, and for the first time, she didn't pull away. They returned to the cabin as snow began to fall again. They didn't speak much, but they didn't need to. That night, as the fire glowed low and the wind whispered through the trees, Claire opened her journal and tore out a page. She folded it quietly and handed it to Thomas. He looked at her, surprised. She nodded. Inside, written in her careful hand, were just a few lines. "I waited at the altar, but part of me knew you'd find your way back. Don't vanish again. This time, if we build it, we stay." Thomas closed his eyes. This wasn't the end of their story. It was the promise of one finally beginning. Some stories don't need a perfect ending. They just need a true one. Spring arrived at the lake slowly, brushing color back into the trees and melting the last of the snow that had blanketed their quiet world. Life outside the cabin stirred again, as if nature had waited for their hearts to thaw before blooming. Claire had started painting again, something she hadn't done since before the wedding. She set up a small easel by the back window, her brush moving in quiet rhythm, capturing the view. The lake, the cabin, the man who now sat reading by the fire with his sleeves rolled up and a dog-eared copy of Wuthering Heights in his lap. Not for show, for her. Thomas had declined 3 interviews, 2 corporate appearances, and a new architectural contract in Dubai. He told the press nothing. He owed them nothing. For once, he was building something not with concrete and glass, but with time, presence, and silence. They didn't rush anything. There were no grand speeches, no formal re-engagement, just shared mornings, long walks, dinner cooked together, and laughter, soft, hesitant at first, then easy, like it had never left. One afternoon, Claire opened the drawer where the ring box still sat. She stared at it for a long time. Then she closed it again and smiled. Later that evening, Thomas found her on the porch swing. "No ring today?" he asked gently. She shook her head. "Not yet. Maybe someday." He nodded, content, because this time he knew. She wasn't waiting for a ring. She was watching to see if he would stay. And he did. Day after day, one quiet act at a time, he stayed. No longer a ghost from the past, but the man she could build a real future with. She thought he'd forgotten her, but at the door of everything they'd lost, he chose to return. It was a Sunday morning when it happened. Claire was tending the small garden behind the cabin, her hands covered in soil, when she heard his footsteps crunch the gravel. Thomas approached slowly, holding something behind his back. She raised an eyebrow, teasing. "What did you break this time?" He smiled, wider than she had seen in years. "Nothing. I just fixed something instead." He brought out an old wooden frame. Inside it, carefully preserved, was the napkin sketch from the cafe, the church, the promise, and the words she'd never forgotten. One day, I'll build a life with you here. But beneath it, he had added something new. A photo of the cabin, their cabin, and below that, in his handwriting, today is that day. Claire didn't speak. She didn't need to. She walked over, kissed his cheek, and placed the frame inside the cabin, right on the mantel where the world could see it if they ever came. That evening, as they watched the sunset from the porch, her hand found his. Not because he asked, not because she owed it, because she chose it. Some love stories are about fireworks and destiny. Others are about waiting, surviving, and choosing, again and again. This was theirs, and for the first time, neither of them was waiting anymore.